You are standing in pitch darkness, and you can see. Not well, but enough to spot a cave bear 20 meters off, its breath a white smear in the black. Every hair on your body is already up before your mind catches on. You spin, grab the nearest child, and run. Not because you thought to, but because something older than thought ran for you. This is you, around 40,000 years ago. Beside you crouches Tusk, who pokes at every shadow and jumps at every snap, but stands his ground when it counts. He sees what you see. And modern science just confirmed both of you had eyes and instincts we have genuinely lost, not weakened. So here's the question that's going to nag at you. What could ancient humans actually do that we no longer can? And why did we let it go? Because once you learn exactly which abilities we traded away and what we traded them for, you stop seeing progress as pure gain. You start seeing the bill. Let's go find out what's printed on it. Vestigial reflex retention. That's the name for it. Here's the thing your body does without telling you. A newborn comes out of the womb with reflexes already loaded, like a phone shipping with apps you never installed. One of them is grip. Press a finger into a baby's palm and the hand clamps shut, hard. Hard enough that doctors throughout the 20th century watched newborns hang from a bar by their own hands. Newborns. The feet do it too. There's a grasping reflex in a baby's feet strong enough to partially support its own body weight. Your toes used to be thumbs. Somewhere back along the line, an ancestor needed to clutch a branch the instant it was born, because the alternative was a long drop and a short life. So the grip arrived pre-installed, no instructions required. And then it leaves. The whole thing fades by about 12 months, right around the time a kid starts walking. The nervous system matures, the old code gets painted over, and the climbing instinct quietly goes dark. Your baby forgets how to be an ape before learning how to ask for crackers. Tusk finds this deeply suspicious, a skill that Strong should not just resign, but it does, on schedule, in nearly every human ever born. That's the strange part. The grip isn't a fluke or a one-family quirk. It's standard issue, documented again and again in pediatric records for 100 years. Every newborn shows up carrying a tool built for a forest none of them will ever climb. Think about what that means. Your body is a palimpsest, an old document scraped clean and written over, with the first draft still faintly showing through. Underneath the human you became, there's an earlier draft of you that lived in trees. For a few months at the start, that draft is briefly legible. Then walking and language and tables and chairs write right on top of it. The branch grabber gets buried under the civilization. You never feel any of this happen. You just lose a power you were too young to remember having. And the only proof it existed is a yellowed photo of a baby dangling from a rod, gripping a world its ancestors left behind. So if our bodies still carry the ghost code of tree-climbing apes, the obvious question is what else we quietly traded away, and what we got handed in return, which brings us to the jaw bargain. How could shrinking a muscle make you smarter? It sounds backwards. It is backwards, and that's the whole point. For millions of years, your ancestors carried jaws built like nutcrackers, anchored by a muscle so thick it clamped down over the skull like a helmet. That muscle was the boss. A growing brain had to negotiate for every spare inch of headroom, and the jaw kept saying no. Then, around 2.4 million years ago, the muscle lost. Hansel Stedman at the University of Pennsylvania found the smoking gun in 2004. He showed that the MYH16 gene, which codes for a large jaw-anchoring muscle, was inactivated by a mutation in the human lineage. The muscle withered, and the skull, no longer squeezed in a vise of its own chewing equipment, was suddenly free to balloon outward. He called it freeing the skull to expand for a larger brain. We can call it myogenic skull liberation, which sounds like a band but is just your face getting weaker on purpose. Here's the flip nobody expects. We assume strength built us. The strong jaw was the king, the brain a humble tenant, but the king had to die for the tenant to grow. Our power gave way, and intelligence moved into the empty room. Read that again, slowly. We got smarter by getting weaker. Now, an honest skeptic pokes a hole here, and they're right to. Cooking also shrank our jaws. Chris Stringer at the Natural History Museum in London has long argued that modern humans have significantly smaller jaw muscles and teeth than Homo heidelbergensis and Neanderthals, because softened food stopped demanding so much bite over tens of thousands of years. A Neanderthal molar's chewing surface runs roughly 10 to 15% bigger than yours, so the mutation alone can't carry all the credit. The gene loosened the cage. Cooking kept the door open. Causality here is a tangle, and anyone selling you one clean cause is selling you something. But the meaning survives the mess. Your intelligence may be less a brilliant design than a happy accident of diminishment. A broken muscle. A skull that grew because nothing stopped it. You'd poke yourself and mutter, "How did you do that?" And the answer is a shrug. Nobody planned this. And if we traded jaw power for brain power, you have to wonder whether we made the same bargain with our senses, swapping ancient perception for something else, which is the smell of ghosts. So you traded jaw muscle for brain. But that's not the strange part. The strange part is your nose, which is running on a wrecked engine. You walk around assuming you smell the world. You smell a sad rerun of it. Mice live inside a chemical universe so rich it would drown you, and we have the broken receipts to prove it. The receipts are genes. In 2003, Doran Lancet at the Weizmann Institute counted your olfactory receptor genes, roughly 800 of them. Then he checked which ones still work. About 60% are pseudogenes, which is a polite word for dead. They sit in your DNA like a phone book, full of disconnected numbers. A mouse, sniffing under your floorboards, runs about 80% working. You run 40%. You lost the bet. That mechanism even has a name, olfactory pseudogenization. Genes for smell that quietly went out of business, one by one, over hundreds of thousands of years, and nobody held a funeral. It gets worse. Many mammals have a second nose tucked inside the first. The vomeronasal organ, built to read pheromones, the secret chemical signals other animals send. Yoav Gilad, same institute, same year, looked at the genes behind it. A mouse carries about 150 working V1R genes. You carry fewer than 5. Essentially, your second nose is a museum exhibit with the lights off. Picture a Paleolithic hunter at a fire in 40,000 BC, certain he smells the whole forest. He smells maybe a third of it. He just has no neighbor sniffing a richer one to embarrass him. Tusk, hearing all this, sniffs the air once, very slowly, and concludes that it smells like nothing in particular. Which, given the data, is exactly correct. Here is the part that should unsettle you. The sense you trust most completely is the one most edited down. What you call the world is a heavily trimmed summary, a highlight reel your dead genes left behind. You are confident, and confidence is not the same as seeing everything. A dog walks the same street and reads a newspaper you cannot even hold. So we lost it. Quietly, genetically, for good. Probably. And somewhere a tribesman pokes you, narrows his eyes, mutters, "How did you do that?" And you shrug, because nobody in 40,000 BC knows. But what if lost perception is not always fixed? What if the right place can wake an ability we simply forgot we owned? Which is exactly what happened to the children of the sea. So is this just a magic trick? Some genetic gift the rest of us missed? No. Open your eyes underwater right now, and the world goes soft and blue, like reading a sign through a foggy window. That's because water bends light differently than air, and your eye, beautifully tuned for air, simply gives up. Everyone's eye does this. Yours, mine, a champion swimmer's, except the Moken kids. The Moken are sea nomads who drift around the Surin Islands off Thailand, living half their lives in boats. Their children dive for clams and sea cucumbers on the seafloor. No goggles, no fuss. And in 2003, a Swedish researcher named Anna Gislain went out there to test something nobody believed. She dropped a card with patterns underwater and asked the kids to read it. They could. Moken children read those patterns with twice the clarity of European children tested in the exact same water. How? They were clamping their pupils shut, constricting them maximally, the way you squint at the sun. Tighter pupil, sharper focus underwater. They'd taught themselves this without knowing they were doing it. Now a sharp critic raises a hand here. This isn't some lost ancient faculty crawling back from the dead, they say. The Moken kids are just pushing an ordinary human limit harder than the rest of us bother to. And honestly, nobody deleted underwater vision from your genome. The Moken aren't reclaiming a buried power. They're flexing a muscle you have and never use. But that's the whole point, and it's a better one. Ghislaine later trained European children the same way, and within months their underwater vision improved too. The hardware was always there. Only the practice was missing. This is aquatic visual plasticity, and it tells you something uncomfortable about what a human even is. You are not a finished machine shipped with fixed specs. You're a negotiation. Your biology offers a range, and your culture decides where inside that range you actually live. We are always becoming, never done. Somewhere in 40,000 BC, a diver surfaces with a fish, eyes still sharp from the depths, and a tribesman pokes him, narrows his eyes, mutters, "How did you do that?" The diver shrugs. Nobody does. And if living culture can stretch our limits like this, the obvious question is the dangerous one. What happens to a species that quietly stops stretching at all, which is the slow mind trade? Watch a baby gorilla. Within months, she grips, climbs, watches her mother and copies. A human baby at the same age just lies there, leaking and screaming. We are, by ape standards, embarrassingly defective newborns. This matters because that helplessness lasts years. A foal walks in an hour. Your kid takes a decade to make toast. Evolution had millions of years to fix this. It refused. In 2012, two scientists named Charlie Charvet and Frank Poulou at Columbia University found out why. They were chasing a gene called srgap2c. It first appeared in our ancestors around 3.4 million years ago, then made a copy of itself again roughly 2.4 million years ago. That second copy is the one that rewired us. Here is what it does. srgap2c slows down how fast your brain wires its connections. The links between neurons, the synapses, build slowly, over years instead of weeks. Other apes wire fast and lock in. We dawdle. We call this the neotenic synaptic delay. Neotenic just means you stay babyish longer. Your brain stays a soft, half-finished thing well into your 20s, which explains a great deal about your 20s. Now, the trade. A gorilla brain finishes early and runs on hard-wired instinct, fast and reliable. See a snake? Flinch? Done. Our slow wiring window costs us that instant reflex. What we get instead is a brain that stays open to learning far longer. A long, hungry blank slate. This is the running tension of the whole human story. Drop a Paleolithic kid in a forest and his body does miraculous things. His eyes adjust to the dark in seconds. A sprained ankle is fine by morning. His stomach shrugs off meat that should kill him. And every time some tribesman narrows his eyes, pokes him, and asks how he did that, the kid just shrugs. Nobody in 40,000 BC has the faintest idea. But that same kid, slow to grow, slow to wire, soaks up everything you teach him. Words. The dangerous helplessness is the point. So hear this clearly. Our long, useless childhood is not a bug evolution forgot to patch. It is the engine. The vulnerability is the whole machine. Every cathedral, every poem, every clumsy first attempt at toast, all of it grew from a brain that stayed soft long enough to be filled. We bought that learning window by selling our instinct speed. But what happened to the bodies that stopped being pushed by hard living, the bones of forgotten effort? So your bones just sit there, right? Passive scaffolding, doing nothing. Your skeleton is a living negotiation, and the deal is brutally simple. Push it hard, it builds. Coast, and it quietly dissolves what you stopped using. Scientists call this disuse osteopenia, which is a fancy name for use it or lose it with a medical bill. Here is where it gets uncomfortable for everyone with a gym membership. In 2009, Helena Malmström studied skeletons from the Mesolithic site of Motala in Sweden. These were ordinary people who lived, hunted, and dropped dead thousands of years ago. Their bone robusticity indices far exceeded those of modern Swedes. In several measurements, their everyday skeletons matched modern elite rowers. Not athletes. Nobody at Motala was training for anything. There was no off-season, no protein shake, no coach yelling about core stability. Their lives simply demanded the kind of loading that modern exercise science calls near elite as a baseline. Walking everywhere, hauling everything, never sitting in a chair for 9 hours. The chair, it turns out, is doing more damage than we admit. You can still watch this happen today, which is the unsettling part. In 2017, David Reichlin studied the Hadza hunter-gatherers of northern Tanzania. Their bone density scans show skeletons substantially denser than age-matched Western controls. The Hadza walk roughly 14,000 to 17,000 steps a day. The average Western adult manages about 5,000, mostly to the fridge and back. So they are not a separate species. They just never opted out of being human. What this means is genuinely strange when you sit with it. The thing we worship as peak performance, the elite rower, the marathon body, was once just the unremarkable shape of a person who lived. Modernity quietly redefined normal downward and never asked our permission. Your ancestors' resting state was your fitness goal. Let that sink in slowly. Somewhere in 40,000 BC, a hunter heals a cracked shin in half the expected time and stands up walking. A nearby tribesman narrows his eyes, pokes the leg, and mutters, "How did you do that?" The hunter shrugs. He has no idea. His body simply did what hard living had always demanded of it, without ceremony or thanks, which makes you wonder if our very bones have drifted this far from their baseline. What has quietly happened to the systems we cannot see in an X-ray, the civilized heart. So you can see the drift in a healed ankle and a thickened bone. But that's not the strange part. The strange part is buried in the one organ you'd most like to keep running. Your heart is quietly clogging, and you may think that's just aging. It isn't. In 2017, Hillard Kaplan studied the Tsimane, forager horticulturalists in the Bolivian Amazon. He scanned their hearts the way a cardiologist scans yours. Their average rate of coronary artery calcification runs about 80% lower than U.S. industrial-age adults. 80%. These are not people sipping kale smoothies and counting steps. They live with parasites, infections, and the occasional bad day involving a jaguar. Yet their arteries stay clean into old age, which is roughly the opposite of what wealthy retirees pay clinics to prevent. This is metabolic baseline drift, the slow slide of an entire body away from the conditions that designed it. Here is the thing nobody tells you. The clogged heart isn't the deviation. You are. The Tsimane are closer to the factory settings. You're running modified firmware on a system that never agreed to the update, and the changes go deeper than hearts. In 2022, Mark Thomas at University College London read Ancient DNA from Pre-Agricultural European Skeletons. He was hunting for the lactase persistence mutation, the one that lets adults drink milk without regret. Before about 4,000 years ago, that mutation was rare, meaning nearly every ancient human stopped digesting milk painlessly somewhere in childhood, exactly as their bodies intended. So lactose intolerance isn't a malfunction you developed, it's the original condition. The ability to chug a glass of milk at 40 is the new weird mutation, and most of the planet still doesn't have it. Sit with that. The thing we call a disorder is the default, and the normal you is the genetic newcomer. Picture a Tsimane man decades into a hard life whose chest never aches when he climbs. A younger one watches him scale a ridge without slowing, narrows his eyes, pokes him in the ribs and mutters, "How did you do that?" The man just shrugs. He doesn't know either. We signed an evolutionary contract written over 2 million years, then changed the terms without reading the fine print. The bill arrives slowly, in arteries and bellies and bones. And if our bodies are quietly paying for living outside the world that built them, what does it mean that the genes saving some of us were borrowed from cousins we buried long ago? An inheritance from the lost. Archaic, introgressive rescue. That's the mechanism, and it sounds like a tax dodge. It means you survive today thanks to a gene you borrowed from an extinct cousin. You did not earn it. Someone with a heavier brow handed it over, then vanished from the family line entirely. Walk up the Tibetan Plateau, 4,000 meters high, where the air gives you about half the oxygen you want. Most humans climb up there, and their blood thickens dangerously, hemoglobin spiking, headaches blooming. Tibetans just live there. They farm, they carry loads, they have babies who do fine. In 2014, Emilia Huerta Sanchez at Berkeley found out why. Tibetans carry a version of a gene called EPAS1 that keeps their hemoglobin about 3 grams per deciliter lower than Han Chinese. And that thinner blood is the trick. The variant didn't evolve in their ancestors. They inherited it from Denisovans, a people we only know from a finger bone in a Siberian cave. So an extinct human relative had a real, working, high-altitude adaptation. We had to marry into it. Imagine a Tibetan grandmother sprinting up a hill while a visitor wheezes. He narrows his eyes, pokes her shoulder and mutters, "How did you do that?" She shrugs. Nobody actually knows they're running on Denisovan software. And here's the thing that should rearrange your skull. The cousins we pity were not lesser drafts of us. In 2013, Island Pierce at Oxford measured Neanderthal eye sockets and found their visual cortex was roughly 6 to 9 cubic centimeters bigger than ours. They saw the world better, possibly at the cost of having fewer friends. A trade we never made. They had the voice box anchor too. In 1989, João Zilhão found a Neanderthal hyoid bone at Kibara Cave in Israel, about 60,000 years old, nearly identical to yours. The anatomy for speech. Maybe not all the wiring. They lacked some of our FOXP2 tuning, but the hardware was there. Even our famous endurance is a kind of subtraction. Andrew Prabhakar showed in 2008 that we lost a chunk of DNA called HACNS1, which in other primates keeps legs short. We deleted it and grew long running legs. We gained a superpower by throwing code away. So what's loss, what's gain, depends which thread you follow. Humanity is not one winning line. It's a braided river, and somewhere upstream, who else is still feeding into us? Stand again in that darkness 40,000 years ago, holding the child in your arms. You still can't see well, but your body already knows the cave bear is there. That silent alarm wasn't magic. It was the price of a life lived raw and close to everything that could kill you. You traded it away, one cooked meal and one stored grain at a time, and you got soft bread and long lives in return. Maybe that's the real story. Not a loss, but a swap we never quite agreed to. So the next time your gut churns at nothing or your hair stands up in an empty room, ask yourself this: how much of that ancient body is still in there, waiting for a darkness that never comes?